Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be talking about a very, very timely and important topic, sexual violence and conflict. My guest today is an expert on this topic. A special representative of the Secretary-General Pramila Patten, originally from Mauritius, was appointed by UN Secretary-General António Guterres as special representative on sexual violence and conflict, with the rank of Undersecretary-General of the United Nations. Her office was established by Security Council Resolution 1888. Ms. Patten succeeded Margot Wallström and Zainab Bangura, both of whom have been guests on Global Connections television. Undersecretary-General Pramila Patten, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. You've got such an important job, and this is such a timely topic. Let's go right into it. What exactly is your office about, and what is the main purpose of it?
Right, my office was established in 2009 through the adoption of Resolution 1888, which you just mentioned. It took the Security Council that long to see wars through the eyes of women and girls whose bodies have been part of the battlefield since the history of war. And the resolution was really adopted out of a concern over the high prevalence of sexual violence in conflict, particularly against women and girls, and the impunity for such crimes. There was suddenly a realization that sexual violence was happening in many conflicts around the world, and in some situations they were widespread and systematic. And that was very much the case at the time in Sudan, in DRC, where sexual violence was happening at a horrifying rate. So the mandate established, the resolution established my mandate, called for the appointment of a special representative to provide strategic and coherent leadership on the issue of prevention and response, to coordinate UN efforts, to engage in advocacy efforts, to engage with governments and all parties to conflict, but also with, of course, survivors and civil society. And it also, given the concerns about impunity for such crimes, it also established a team of experts on the rule of law, which works under my leadership. And the team of experts is mandated to assist national authorities to strengthen the rule of law and to enhance national capacity to address impunity.
And it's vitally important to have that dialogue and engagement of all the parties in order to stop this horrific violence that's taking place. Well, let me just mention your website. It's un.org/sexual violence in conflict. And we'll put that up in the lower part of the screen so that our viewers can go to it and check it out. It's got so much more information than we'll be able to cover today, that's for sure. Well, let me ask you, you've got so many programs going on, important programs. There's one now, there's a campaign, it's called Stop Rape Now. What exactly is that program? What's the purpose of it? And who are the participants?
Well, I have an advocacy mandate, and throughout the mandate, I do advocacy. But the Stop Rape Now campaign was an initiative of UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict, which was launched back in 2007, even before the mandate was established. Mm-hmm. And it was a campaign that actually brought visibility around the scourge of sexual violence used as a tactic of war. It brought visibility around the devastating consequences on victims, their families, the society, the community. It was a very successful campaign because prior to this campaign and the establishment of the mandate, sexual violence in conflict has been rightly called one of the world's most silenced crime and one of the world's least condemned crime. And I think that campaign was really successful. And the campaign also advocated for the establishment of my mandate, which happened 2 years later in 2009. So the UN Action survived the establishment of my mandate, and as the special representative of the Secretary General, I chair UN Action Network, which today unites the work of 26 different UN entities from across a spectrum of public health, human rights, gender equality, peacekeeping, political affairs, and development. And UN Action brings together that collective experience of all these entities and the institutional capacity of the UN system. And for me, it is a very important implementing arm, and it has actually filled very, very critical knowledge gaps. It has generated policy guidance and training materials to inform evidence-based prevention and response to sexual violence.
Have you been able to identify how well it's going? Are we seeing progress in that area? I know some areas are absolutely impossible to get into because of the conflict that's going on, but have we seen progress in that area of curtailing rapes and sexual violence against women?
We have come a long way in those 15 years. This issue has never been so visible. Today, we cannot say that it is collateral damage or an inevitable byproduct of war, which was very much the case prior to the establishment of the mandate. Today, the United Nations is reaching thousands of survivors who were once invisible. It's true that it remains a chronically underreported crime, but from my engagement over the past 7 years, I see that survivors are more willing to come forward, including men and boys, which also were invisible victims. Even the UN Action Network has grown. When I took office, it was comprised of 11 entities. And today we have reached 26 UN entities working together as a one UN to prevent and respond. We have developed tools from model legislative provision and guidance on sexual violence to a prevention framework. We see results from the work of the team of experts on justice and accountability. Even the Security Council, after Resolution 1888, I mean, there has been 5 other Security Council resolutions dedicated to the issue of sexual violence, with the last resolution 2467 adopted in 2019, which recognized, for example, the plight of children born of rape, who were also invisible, that recognized the importance of having a survivor-centered approach in both prevention and response. But you are right, Bob, that the reality on the ground is quite different. We see that with every war, we see an increase in sexual violence. And in fact, today, we are going through great global turbulence where we see a record number of conflicts since World War II, record number of displaced people, over 110 million, record number of women and children living in conflict-affected countries, over 600 million, record military expenditure in trillion, but at the same time, we see drastic cuts in humanitarian funding. So for me, we have a robust framework. What we need to do is to really convert these commitments into compliance, these resolutions into solutions on the ground.
That's exactly right.
That is a challenge.
And the United Nations can only be as successful as the member states will allow it to be. And they've got to be involved in this. They have to fund the programs adequately, which apparently a lot of the member states are not doing now. And they will admit it. They will say, well, we've cut back on our funding, which is not good. But that's very important. Well, let me ask you, there are so many things that have come out that are so important. One is this annual report on conflict-related sexual violence. What were 1 or 2 of the main recommendations of the Secretary General's report?
My office has the responsibility to prepare the annual report of the Secretary General, which is debated before the Security Council. And this year, in April, the 15th report of the Secretary General was debated before the Council. And the report contains very important recommendations. It's true that often you see the same recommendations over and over again, but the last report did include some new ones as well. And they were, for example, they include the need for member states to comply with the Arms Trade Treaty, to regulate their arms trade and exports in light of their potential to facilitate the commission of sexual violence. And that was as a result of information we received from the field about the nexus between arms proliferation and the commission of sexual violence. A very, very high percentage of women reported being raped at gunpoint. Given access challenges to the documentation of cases, as well as increased reports about sexual violence, sexualized torture in detention settings, like in Ukraine or the occupied Palestinian territory, there was a recommendation about the need for all parties to conflict to provide the United Nations with unhindered access to conflict areas and to detention centers. Other recommendations were targeted at the Security Council, urging them to encourage all state and non-state parties to conflict to adopt time-bound commitments to prevent and address sexual violence, to monitor compliance, including through sanctions committees, to ensure that sexual violence is systematically monitored and incorporated as a standalone designation criteria for targeted sanctions to deter the commission of such violence by all parties, because sanction is a very important tool. There was a recommendation for the Security Council to sanction persistent perpetrators. And to the point that you made earlier, there was a recommendation for donors to address chronic funding shortfalls by providing predictable financial support to the mandate. But there were also some recommendations to government, such as the importance of fostering an enabling environment for survivors to seek services and support without being stigmatized. There was a recommendation about the need to enhance accountability, including by adopting robust laws in line with international standards. And one very important one concerning the meaningful participation of affected communities, human rights defenders, and civil society representatives in all peace and security processes, including those related to arms transfers and exports, which of course, have classically been gender blind.
Those are excellent recommendations. And I know some countries are doing some or all of them now, but it would be great if all 193 countries of the United Nations General Assembly could sign on to this. Well, we're going to take a very brief break and come back in just a moment, and we'll talk about the most challenging areas where you're encountering so much violence. It's just unbelievable as to how to deal with it. But you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions on Global Connections Television are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. If you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows and you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're talking about an extremely important topic, sexual violence in conflict. And my guest today is an expert on this topic. Special Representative of the Secretary-General Pramila Patten was appointed by UN Secretary-General António Guterres as Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict with the rank of Undersecretary-General of the United Nations. Madam Undersecretary-General, there are so many areas of violence. What would you rate as maybe the top 2 or 3? And what are some of the impediments to helping the people in that area? Now, assuming the fact that conflict is raging is one of those impediments, but how do you view that?
That's a very difficult question, considering that I'm currently covering over 20 conflict countries. But as we see out of control political divisions and ferocious conflict, which are inflicting terrible suffering. I would say that the top five are the Sudan, DRC, Haiti, Ukraine, and Israel, Gaza. But of course, there are others like Myanmar, South Sudan, Central African Republic. In the Sudan, since the conflict erupted last year on the 15th of April between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, sexual violence against women, but also displaced and refugee women and girls, has spiked out of control, with women's bodies on the front line of the conflict. Last year, I went to South Sudan at the border with Sudan, and I met with women and girls who have been brutalized and terrorized by sexual violence committed at gunpoint. I heard accounts of young women having been abducted from dormitories and hospitals, shackled and transported in the back of pickup trucks by fighters to be sold in slave markets in northern Darfur. Women and girls have been targeted for rape, gang rape, and abduction on the basis of their ethnicity. And of course, impunity for war crimes in this region since 2003 has really emboldened perpetrators, silenced survivors, but also undermined prospect for peace. This year, in July, I went to Chad, in the eastern part of Chad, where the majority of the victims fleeing Darfur were. And again, the situation was catastrophic. They all had horrific accounts of what they went through in the country during flight, but also the insecurity in the IDP camps. So the situation in Sudan is very dire, but unfortunately, it's not. It's falling below the radar in terms of not hitting the headlines. Haiti is another very difficult situation where armed gangs are using rape, including collective rapes and other forms of sexual violence, to instill fear, punish, subjugate, and inflict pain on local populations, with the ultimate goal of expanding their areas of influence. So far, I have not been able to go to Haiti. Only yesterday, I had a meeting with the special envoy on Haiti, and who gave me an account of his and his findings following his very recent visit. And it is clear that those gangs are able to commit such acts of sexual violence, mainly because of widespread insecurity and also ease of access to high caliber weapons and ammunition trafficked from abroad. I am sending a delegation, a technical team in November to Haiti, and I am envisaging a visit early next year. The Democratic Republic of Congo is also facing a very severe, complex, and neglected humanitarian crisis. I was there last year, and following alarming reports of a spike in sexual violence. You will recall that Margot Wallström, whom you mentioned, in 2010, referred to DRC as the rape capital of the world. And what we are seeing today is women going to the field carrying condoms with the certainty that they will be raped. They are today facing an impossible choice between economic subsistence and sexual violence, between their livelihoods and their lives. Maybe the next Ukraine, we have seen also how, since I have been to Russia, to Ukraine 3 times, and we are seeing how since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, thousands of displaced and refugee women and girls are facing a heightened risk of being preyed upon by traffickers. And we are seeing detainees and prisoners of war suffering high levels of sexual violence. Maybe the last country that I'll mention is Israel, and how, following my mission to Israel in January to gather information on the 7th of October attacks by Hamas, I found reasonable grounds to believe that sexual violence occurred during the 7th of October, and its aftermath in multiple locations across the Gaza periphery, including rape, gang rape. At the Nova Festival, we also received information about multiple incidents of sexual violence, with victims subjected to rape, gang rape, and then killed. Or killed while being raped. And there was a lot of abundant circumstantial information indicative of some forms of sexual violence. With respect to hostages, and I'm very concerned because there are still hostages in captivity, I found clear and convincing information that some have been subjected to various forms of sexual violence, including rape and sexualized torture, and sexualized, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. And we concluded that there was reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may be ongoing. But on the other hand, as we speak, in the Middle East, women and girls are disproportionately affected by the displacement, trauma, and terror. They comprise more than half of the victims of the relentless bombing of Gaza, which has shattered the healthcare, leaving survivors of gender-based violence, pregnant women, and others in desperate need with really nowhere to turn.
Exactly. And you hit it on the head when you said that so many of these places have fallen off the radar screen. We're not reading about Sudan. We're not reading enough about what's going on in Darfur. Haiti, to some degree, we're not. But this has to change. I'm curious, does your office maintain a list of shame, maybe to elevate this problem or to shine the spotlight on some of these countries? Some of the UN agencies do have a list of shame. Does your office maintain that?
Right. The listing of parties is the prerogative of the Secretary-General. And in fact, in his annual report, there is an annex which includes a list of parties credibly suspected of committing or being responsible for patterns of rape or other forms of sexual violence. And the list does not purport to be comprehensive, but rather includes parties in relation to which credible information is available. And in the last report of the Secretary-General, which was debated before the Council in April, 58 parties were listed, the majority being non-state actors, and several of which have been designated terrorist groups according to the sanctions list of the Security Council. National military and police forces that are listed are required to adopt specific time-bound commitments and action plans to address sexual violence, and they are also prohibited from participating in UN peace operations. And effective implementation of commitments, including cessation of such violence, is a key consideration for the delisting of parties. I must say that when it comes to state actors, I have had a lot of success in terms of engaging with the concerned government through the signing of a joint communique or a framework of cooperation, working with the governments on their security sector reform, ensuring that they have zero tolerance policies, working on action plans with the military, with the police, and I have even established a security sector hub in my office. But unfortunately, when it comes to non-state actors, I have not had much success. Only a few have signed unilateral communique and have adopted zero tolerance policies. But I must be honest and tell you that these commitments are unfortunately often on paper only, as is the case with the Rapid Support Services. I engaged with them last year and requested that they sign a unilateral communique, and that they also have adopted a zero tolerance policy, which they promptly did after my engagement with RSF on the 1st of August. But there has been no behavioral change whatsoever on the ground. So the way I work on the list, the way I use the list of shame is to engage with sanctions committees and to brief sanctions committees on a regular basis and to ensure that there is an alignment between the Security Council sanctions committees and the annex and the list of shame of the Secretary-General.
Well, this has been the most thoughtful, comprehensive overview of a horrific problem that I've heard many updates on these issues at the United Nations and in other areas, but you have really summarized this so very nicely. And I know there are viewers in the United States and around the world some of them will find this totally unimaginable. And this will get them to thinking how they can get involved, hopefully, and be of assistance to your agency, as well as to many of the other United Nations agencies that are working to combat these problems. I had hoped we could talk about the Summit of the Future, but the clock is not our friend. We ran out of time. But Undersecretary-General Pramila Patten, I want to thank you so very much for a very informative and a very interesting program.
Thank you.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.